Every nation's history begins with a struggle. Many large empires have evolved out of a struggle of their people. A struggle for independence, self-determination, or liberation of one's own local culture from foreign rule. As is with the Persians against the Medes, the Romans against the Etruscans, or the Ottomans against other Turkish states. But there is a difference between the Ottoman story and that of the others. Ottoman does not represent one ethnicity or people. Rather, this was the name of a Turkish dynasty, possibly the most well-known in the world. Nonetheless, there have been many other Turkish dynasties before the Ottomans that shaped the lives of the Turks as well as that of many other peoples. This civilization conquered the Middle East with the help of the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan and triggered the Crusades, and later marched under the House of Osman to the walls of Vienna. It is a civilization known for its coffee and food, for its carpets and tea, for hospitality, as well as for its national pride, and has a long history of fighting and conquering. A very special feature of the Turks, nonetheless, is that they have never stayed in one place for very long. Again, unlike the Romans and the Persians, the Turks went away very far from their original homeland, which did not lay in southeastern Europe or in the Middle East, but in Central Asia. The Turks, meaning all Turkic peoples, sooner or later emigrated from their original settlements in modern-day Mongolia and Kazakhstan to other regions, and thus history books or documentaries on TV like to tell us about the Turks who migrated from the deepest steppes of Central Asia to Europe and the Middle East. But it is never really discussed how and why the Turks left that place and how they actually lived before. According to predominant narratives, the Turks just loved to fight for no reason. Anyone who believes that the early Turks were wild nomads who plundered barbarically through the anarchic steppes and did what Attila and Genghis Khan seemingly loved to do all day should think twice before writing a comment now. Because the Huns of Attila and the Mongols of Genghis Khan were living in a precarious situation before their empires emerged. Anarchy was part of their daily lives. But between the Hunnic invasion and before the Mongol conquests, the Turks had actually created the largest steppe empire until that time, and established what is known as Pax Turcica across Asia. An empire that was larger than even the Ottomans could have possibly imagined. One that was revered and feared by the Chinese, the Persians, and even the Byzantines long before the Ottoman dynasty had been founded, the Empire of the Göktürks. Over 1,000 years before Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the Turks were scattered across the Eurasian Steppe plain. From the Caucasian Mountains and the Caspian Sea via Siberia to the border region of the Korean Peninsula, many Turkish tribes were living in different places, although not in isolation to one another. The word Turk first appears in a Chinese chronology in the 5th century, but cultural aspects such as the language and religion of the Turks indicate that centuries ago there had been a collection of traditions and beliefs from which the Turkish culture emerged, which is why the European Huns are counted as Turkic Turkish chronologies. Nonetheless, only after the creation and expansion of the Gok-Turk Empire, the Turkish culture became firmly established across all of Asia. The ruling dynasty of the Gok-Turks, the ASHINA, have an origin story that interestingly resembles that of a northern Chinese and even the Roman foundation myth. Legend has it that the last survivor of a Turkish tribe escaped from the Gaochang region in modern northwestern China to a cave in the Altai Mountains as a young boy and was raised there by a she-wolf. The boy was unable to fight and therefore stayed with the wolf. He grew into a man and became intimate with her. The she-wolf gave birth to 10 boys who all grew up to become strong men, determined to vow revenge on their enemies. One of the men gave himself the surname ASHINA, staying faithful to his wolf-esque roots. At some point, the man left the cave area and marriage with women of other tribes ensued. The ASHINA family became 70 people, later 700. They had by then populated the surroundings and were in contact with other tribes further away from the Altai Mountains. When they left the area, they took revenge on their former enemies. This gave rise to the Turk people. The legend of ASHINA can be linked to the fact that later a tribe called Onok, meaning 10 arrows, populated the region west of the Altai, just before the appearance of the ASHINA clan, and later became an integral part of the Göktürk Empire. ASHINA in form of a she-wolf was then established as an important symbol in Turkish mythology. The wolf, known as Börü in ancient Turkish, is a sacred animal and has a similar meaning to the Turks as had the wolf who raised Romulus and Remus to the Romans. But the Turks of medieval Central Asia seem to have lived a vastly different life than the people of the modern Turkish republics. Of course, this includes their lifestyle in the fields of domestic and livestock farming, as well as the fact that the Turks lived in tribes that rarely formed confederations. For a long time, the Turks preferred to live in smaller tribes and avoided centralizing political power. In winter, families migrated to the warmer south, and in the summer months, to their residences in the north to escape the heat. They hunted their food, ran cattle and plantations, and took part in the lively trade along the old Silk Road. They were semi-nomadic peoples, and at some point, the Turks also made a name for themselves as hard-working miners and skilled blacksmiths. DNA analysis also suggests that the Turks were a heterogeneous group of people, united in language and tradition, but both the ASHINA and all other Turkish tribes, from East Asia to the Caspian Sea, had something else in common. They were followers of Tengrism. Tengrism encompasses belief in Tengri, the almighty ruler of heaven, an entity that, unlike the god of some other religions, has not been personified. Tengri sees and hears everything. However, Tengri is not explicitly a punishing god. If someone had lived a morally good life, they would definitely be treated well in the afterlife. Someone who had behaved badly throughout would have to face the consequences and walk through the many levels of the underworld until they had to answer to its godlike entity, ERLIK. This is the first aspect that makes Tengrism so unique. Despite the monotheistic orientation, there are many other deities such as ERLIK or UMAY, the protector of all unborn children, and synonymous with Mother Earth. People whose souls have not come to rest at death are born again. The souls of all other people are partially transferred into things in nature. Trees, mountains, rivers and lakes are inhabited by the so-called earth-fire spirits, who are supposed to ensure a balance between nature and humanity. Many customs of Tengrism have survived and are still cultivated today in Turkish countries. Examples include certain rules of conduct after the birth of a child and before the burial of a family member, decorating wish trees, sacred numbers such as 7 and 40, and the shaman drum. The shaman, by the way, did not play a central role in Tengrism. The ancient Turks were not shamanists, as the shaman's task was to hold ceremonial rites and to heal sick and wounded people. However, he was able to contact Tengri and the other gods to pass on their message to the people, and thus served as a consultant to the ruler. Generally, the balance of power is in harmony in Tengrism, or at least it's supposed to be, which is the second important aspect of this religion. Ideally, people should live in harmony with nature. They shouldn't eat and drink more than is necessary. They should not cause destruction upon other peoples, financially exploit individuals, or even nature for its own gain. Humans obviously make mistakes in their lives, but in Tengrism, it is important that they learn from their mistakes, move on from the past and make a better future for themselves and their loved ones. Everything that exists is thus part of an everlasting life circle. This is why trees, like the tree of life, are sacred things in Turkish mythology, next to the wolf. Humans are as much part of this world as are the trees, but they can act in a harmful way to their surroundings. That being said, Tengrism is perhaps less a religion than a philosophy of life. The ASHINA clan soon established themselves as the strongest tribe in Central Asia. The Turks entered the world stage in 551, when Bumin, leader of the ASHINA, put down a revolt by Tile in Mongolia, which were also a Turkish tribe. The ASHINA as well as the Tile had been in a vassal-like position towards the ruler of the Rouran Khaganate. At that time, the Rouran were the lords of the Mongolian steppe. They controlled a vast area from Manchuria to Central Asia. Anagoi, the supreme ruler, bore the title of KHAGAN, which is equivalent to the European title of an emperor. When Bumin put down the revolt, he asked the KHAGAN for a favor and wanted to hold the hand of Anagoi's daughter. But Anagoi lashed out at Bumin and rejected the Turk for being a low-tier slave blacksmith. Bumin took this as an opportunity to end the vassalization and declared war on Anagoi and the entire Rouran Khaganate. The ASHINA were so successful that by the end of the war, Anagoi committed suicide and his family fled to China. It can be assumed that another part of the Rouran fled to Europe and became known there under the name Avars, which is what the Rouran are called in Turkish history books. A year later, Bumin finally founded his own state, which he characteristically called Turkey. It was the first and until 1923, the last state that bore Turk in its name. He had not been the first Turkish ruler in history, but he demanded to be categorized as one. With the ambition to unite the other Turkish tribes in Asia, Bumin took on the now vacant title of KHAGAN and led his ASHINA family to fame and power.